Welcome back to Pop Culture Graveyard. I am Hollis. With me, as always, is Dave. Hello, Dave. For those of you only listening, Dave has just held up a cipher, which I believe probably says, hello, I'm with you now.
I bet you he can solve it right here live on.
Hi, Hollis.
There you go. He did it. He solved it, folks.
With the Zodiac symbol and everything. That's great.
We'll include it in the comments.
Yeah, for sure. If you have not yet surmised what this episode is, we are covering the 2007 crime procedural Zodiac. It is a murder mystery, which has still never been solved in real life. Dave, coming to this film, what did you know about the actual Zodiac killer and or the suspects and players in the game?
I actually had a bunch of stuff in the back of my head. I think because I'm a person who was old enough to watch television just when the book came out and people were talking about it and there were shows about it. And so I had weirdly had a bit of information in my head about the Zodiac killings.
Okay, good, I guess, is what I say. But I knew everything about the Zodiac case prior to coming in.
No wonder you're trying to justify it.
I know, Jack Mullinex up in Vallejo. I know Ken Narlow out in Napa. I know Nikolai. I know all these police guys. I knew, the victims at Lake Berryessa, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. Like, I have had all of these victims and suspects swirling in my head prior to the film. So for someone like me, this film, David Fincher it feels weird to use this word, but he lovingly crafted this pulse-pounding drama, which ordinarily would be the stuff of a good genre mystery pulled out of thin air, written fictionally, whole cloth. He gives that treatment to basically a documentary, the skeleton of a documentary dressed up in dramatic clothing.
Is this our first film that is reality based? I think it is.
Yeah, well, if you count the bicycle race and the Little 500 and breaking away.
Well, that's true. That's loosely based on a winning of a bicycle race. Yeah, that's the closest we've come. But this is someone in there trying to get it right, trying to deliver.
Yeah.
So I could see if you were not gonna say fan. If you were a fan of the Zodiac killer,
right?
It's like, oh, I had all his merch. But, if you were following that stuff, to have it lovingly delivered to you by David Fincher is a treat.
I also thought this would be the perfect film to complete the 1-2 punch of LA Confidential and Zodiac, because that was, a brilliant retro crime caper film that was created out of nothing by James Ellroy, the writer of the book. And this film, based on the book Zodiac by Robert Graysmith, I also have the later incarnation of that book. I believe it's called Zodiac Unmasked. Zodiac could not be more different than LA Confidential. And yet at the same time, they're both really easy to watch.
Yeah, I was surprised how long this movie was after having watched it. And then I checked and I was like, oh, wow, that was a lot of movie I just took in.
Yeah, it's very thorough, but it's not plotting.
Yeah. To continue the compare and contrast, it's very fake cops, real cops. Like, let's go in there guns blazing, and that's all circumstantial evidence. That doesn't do anything for me.
Right.
These cops, we do it at any cost, and those cops saying, we can't arrest them.
They can't even get a search warrant at points. With all this evidence.
Actually, the comparison happens within the movie because Dirty Harry,
which is based on the Zodiac case.
And he's busting criminals by hook or by crook. Poor Dave Toschi has to watch that and say, yeah, I could do it too if I was allowed to just shoot a hole in everything that got in my way.
Yeah, I believe the killer in Dirty Harry is called Scorpio.
Yeah, that's right. It was Scorpio. Zodiac,
by the way, that's
Scorpio.
One of the guy playing Scorpio. That's one of the. I used to know his name. He also played Liberace in a TV movie. That's one of the great performances in any crime film. He's outrageous. He was in Charlie Varick. He's a great actor. I forget his name.
Would have been a great Barney Miller criminal.
Oh yeah, that guy. He's giving you.
I remember him. Yep.
Okay, so this film, Zodiac, directed by David Fincher. My wife and I had a Fincher Fest not too long ago
Whoa, whoa, whoa!
and
It's a
watched
kids
a
show.
bunch of his we watched a bunch of his films, Seven, Fight Club, The Game. We are big fans of David Fincher in this household. Are you a fan of Fincher?
I am. We did one of his movies. We did the Facebook movie,
Yes, we did The Social Network.
Social Network. I loved Fight Club, and I loved this.
Yeah.
Uh, I this movie was very stabby for my tastes.
Yeah.
Um,
But I think that pays the proper respect to the victims. It's not sugar-coated. What they had to go through, you can at least hear a few stab wounds. It honors the death by not making it Hollywood and not
mhm,
making it pretty and not glossing over it. So you're like, oh, wow, Zodiac's hood is so cool. Like, it's
mhm.
brutal and someone died. And I think it honors that. So I'm okay with how graphic that was.
Yeah, that's a very reasonable explanation for why it should be there, but doesn't change my reaction to it. My discomfort is not why did you do that?
Hmm.
My discomfort is that is discomforting for me. But the killings eventually are done. And I guarantee you I watched that movie with a slightly different brain because of his willingness to show me actual murders the way he did.
Yeah. The screenplay was written by James Vanderbilt. And as I said earlier, it's based on the book Zodiac and Zodiac Unmasked by Robert Graysmith, who was a cartoonist at the San Francisco Chronicle until he was so driven by his interest in the case that he eventually wrote the book Zodiac, which really exploded the Zodiac killer into a phenomenon yet again, and is the reason that there are so many Zodiac killer enthusiasts to this day.
It's sort of a self-fulfilling, like, well, why are people so it's like, because they got a book. You know, you don't get a book, you don't last. People immortalize you, even if you're a psychopathic killer, you can get immortalized. The Zodiac killer got immortalized.
Yeah.
With a mere like what I mean, what did he kill? I mean, he claimed a lot of stuff and
It could be anywhere from 5 people to
mm,
37, if he's to be believed. But one of the great
37 sounds like we got to move some books, people.
well, uh, the problem and what muddies the waters forensically and otherwise is that the Zodiac killer, in his letters, at least some that have been authenticated as being his letters, claimed to have killed many more people than can be proven given the
Yeah.
evidence. So, first, a statement. Zodiac is about, as you said, 2.5 hours long. Yet I feel we could do an entire episode just based on the first 10 minutes of this film. It's masterful. We get from
Mhm.
July 4th, 1969, the shooting of the couple in Vallejo and the murder of the girl, to the San Francisco newsroom 4 weeks later in roughly 9 minutes. And it just
Mhm.
seamlessly unfolds. It's great musically, it's great editing wise, there's a momentum to it. It's masterful.
What do you call the sound that is like the crickets and the cars and the
Just sound design, I guess.
this movie sounded amazing to me.
That's
This
Fincher, as
like
we
it was
said.
weird. It was weird. It was like the suburbs sounded like the suburbs, and each environment, I was like, God, they nailed the sound for this. You know when you smell something and it brings back a memory?
Yeah.
Like I was getting that through my ears. It was very impressive. And yeah,
Yeah.
the first 10 minutes, starting with sort of slowly driving through a town,
Hmm.
through the suburbs,
On July
um,
4th.
on
And
July
the
4th.
fireworks and the
Yeah, just
houses and everything's so
muted
beautiful.
fireworks and the
Hmm.
houses, and there's people I almost feel like people went in and out of their houses more in the early '60s, you
Because
know?
they interacted with their neighbors.
Yeah, so they were, "Oh, let me run over and grab some iced tea," or "Let me blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. Oh, I have that book. I'll go grab it." So you see people going in and out of their doors, and
Hmm.
I was like, "Going in and out of your house, that's so old school."
It is. And
As
there's
if
my favorite. There's a guy just emptying water out of his cooler that had once been ice, just
Yeah,
such a
yeah.
July 4th thing. It's not, it's dusk. Oh, it's so
Mhm.
beautiful. And the one
Yeah, it was
victim picks up the other victim. But when we're going over the city, when we just open, you just hear the first tinkle of the piano and it opens with the song Easy to Be Hard by Three Dog Night. Perfect. It's all about a lack of compassion. It's all about a lack of love. And yet it's so pretty. And we're going over this pretty neighborhood. And it's a slice of this neighborhood
It's
in the
the
days
first.
before it was gripped by killings. And so you're
Absolutely.
seeing, I guarantee you, a couple of months later, nobody's going in and out of their houses at night.
Right.
They're locked up. So
Yeah.
it's great. They gave us that. They're like, here's what was lost.
Yeah.
Here's
There's
what was
literally a
destroyed.
curfew later.
Yes.
Like, yeah. So they've set it up perfectly. And it's the first of absolutely perfect musical choices, which
Oh.
brings me to something I wanted to say.
Hmm.
You bought a hot dog from who? George Jaculius.
Oh, Beasties.
You bought a hot dog from who?
Oh, Chachakulius.
Oh, Jaculius. His name is in the
Producers.
credits.
Mm.
I believe as a musical director or something.
Yeah, his fingers in all the pies.
Yeah, I watch so closely now, the opening, the closing, because
Mm.
I'm like, Hollis could bring something up. And I was like, it was funny because I literally know that name as a Beastie Boys line. I do
Right.
not know that person. 45 years, I did not know who they were making a reference to.
Since we're talking about the opening, I just want to point out that July 4th, 1969 is just about 6 months before the time where the Holdovers is set
Oh, is it? Yeah,
that we
okay.
that we did previously. So, just to give you an idea of that time, when we first meet the two victims, Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau in Vallejo, in this beautiful neighborhood, she picks him up in the car. Trust me, as a Zodiac geek, they nailed everything. They nailed everything from the print of her dress to the cigarette lighter that he's fidgeting with to
Oh,
him
yeah.
wearing different layers of clothing. They nailed it. Dave, as a car guy, you must have loved all of the cars that we're seeing in this film.
Yeah, I mean, whenever there's one of these period things, I'm like, I always say I'm always looking forward to seeing the cars, and this one they roll them out.
And they go into a drive-through restaurant, Mr. Ed's. She's going through the parking lot, all these gorgeous cars of the time. And then she gets nervous and drives out. And then later, when they're parked, a car drives by and stops. And she's
Mhm.
really nervous. He says, I saw that car at Mr.
Uh,
Ed's. He's like, who is that? She's like, it's nobody. He drives off. She thinks she's okay. Events like this murder that's about to happen at Blue Rock Springs, I believe is this location. One of the great losses is that one victim doesn't say to another victim who survives it, oh, that's Tom from where I work. He's obsessed with me or something. They don't
mm,
give more information. And it's almost like not to blame the victims, but just these things happen. It's why the JFK assassination has reached this critical mass where
mhm.
there are so many unanswered things, and all it does is fuel all of the conjecture and all of the guesswork and obsession of quote unquote fans or fanatics of these subgenres, of these pockets of conspiracy theories. It's a shame that this was never solved, but at the same time, it's only a thing because it was never solved.
Yeah, there's a lot of snake eating its own tail, meta stuff happening in here. Like I said earlier, you don't write a book, you don't immortalize the killer. Is the book written because the killer is immortalized, or is the killer immortalized because somebody wrote a book? And then not solving it because you don't say anything, and we wouldn't have heard about it at all if she would have said, "Hey, that's Norm from Fargo."
Yeah.
Hey, that's Lee. He's been following me. But I was going to point out that like it has changed a bit in that you now see something which would probably be unheard of then, which is like a woman saying, "Hey, I'm going to meet a guy I met online. This is his name in case I disappear." People do that now. It's sad, but it's like humanity learned its lesson.
Also, you brought up how stabby the film is. I have a problem in all films with violence towards women. It like really disturbs me and I can't, watch, or sometimes I'll fast forward through things. When rewatching this film, I always turn off the sound because it's the sound that gets me just on the stabbing and stuff. But Something that you don't think about, I think, when people talk about serial killers, 9 out of 10 times, the victims are women.
Of course, yeah.
It's very rare that you have a Jeffrey Dahmer. You know,
Yeah,
you're signing up for abuse and or killing of women if you watch any kind of serial
mhm.
killer documentary or dramatization.
It actually occurred to me that I wish this guy was still around so that I could make fun of him to his face. Be like,
Mm.
"The most dangerous game? You sneak up on unarmed women.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
That's the most dangerous game to you?
yeah.
Go to hell." I enjoy diminishing what serial killers do. I hate,
Mm.
"Oh my god, he's a genius." He's not a genius. His code isn't interesting. It's solved by
No.
regular people. His one true point is that if you kill people randomly, it's very hard to catch someone.
Back then, before
Mhm.
forensics and
Yeah.
DNA caught up with the killers, John Mulaney has this fantastic bit about killers back in the time before DNA. As long as you were not literally standing there with a gun in your hand when the police
Right, that's
arrived,
it, you're good.
you had 100% chance of getting away with it. You
Yeah.
know, because back then it'd be like, hey Johnson, what's going on? He's like, hey, we found this pool of blood, might be the killers. He's like, gross. Now back to my hunch. So yeah, one last thing about Zodiac, whoever he is, and like lessening who he was,
Diminishing, yeah. I
diminishing
like
him.
to diminish him. Please do.
He had a super thin skin. He was insecure, and you could
Mhm.
tell from the letters. And he's like, you know, don't say anything bad about me, only put this. And like, oh, I did that. I didn't do that. It's like, fuck you. Like,
Yeah.
and the best thing they ever did was stop running his letters, you know, and see
Mhm.
what he'll do or whatever.
It was really very like, what a prima donna.
That's exactly what it was. Yeah.
It's like, what it's like, "Hey, you kinda misrepresented what I," and the guy he was most angry at was the guy who said he's probably a latent homosexual.
Yeah. Paul Avery. I saw when I first got involved with when I joined the force, when I first became interested in the Zodiac killer stuff, it seemed to me there was such a weird dichotomy between the murders themselves and the letters that were sent that I got in my head there might be two guys. They're in cahoots in so much as like the guy who writes the letters knows about them, but they're totally different types of people because they're totally different types of things, or they're split personality or something. But like the guy who writes those letters is a total prima donna, and the
Mhm,
brutality of the guy who kills these people doesn't seem to me to be anybody who feels anything.
mhm,
So it's
yeah,
really weird. So these kids who were killed, it's a brutal murder, but it's again the sound design. Hurdy Gurdy Man by Donovan is
mhm.
playing. I never saw that song as anything but a hippy dippy psychedelic
Same. That
jam.
song
It's
my dad had that 8-track, so we heard that song a lot in the Cougar. He had the Donovan record with Hurdy Gurdy Man on it, and I've never thought of it as anything but this beautiful psychedelia,
hmm
and it was just immediate. I was like, "Oh, that song just took a bad turn for me." Another good choice. It's
it's
like,
great, as only a great director can do. He just claimed that song, and it is so inexorably linked to this scene right now in my mind. I can never hear it again and not think of that murder.
it's the Zodiac's Helter Skelter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after the murder, there's a letter that arrives at the Chronicle, which is where the Zodiac sent the bulk of his letters. And it's opened by a secretary, I assume. And she's played by Candy Clark, a fantastic actress. She was in The Man Who Fell to Earth. Before that, she was in American Graffiti. Just showing you, like we said with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, these great directors, there's no weak link in the actor chain, like even small parts he
Mhm.
just packs them with great actors, you know, Donald Logue or Chloe Sevigny or Dermot
You know
Mulroney.
you know how I am the guy who says maybe twice during a movie, "Oh, I think I know that guy?"
Hmm.
Like, if I say it twice, that's a lot for me.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about movies with Brad Pitt in them, you know? Um, I said it 7 or 8 times in this movie.
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, that guy. Oh, that guy.
Hmm.
Oh, rich man's Mr. Woodman.
Philip Baker Hall, I assume.
Got me.
And
Yeah."
another thing, Cotter.
Oh, yeah.
We first see Robert Graysmith. He's a cartoonist. We see him in his car on the way to work. And then at work, he's in there with the rest of the staff while they're going over this letter from the Zodiac. Jake Gyllenhaal plays Robert Graysmith. What did you think about Jake Gyllenhaal?
The point that was driven home almost immediately was these are all newspaper men.
Right.
They're still newspaper men. Like the
Mhm.
50s has dragged on into the 70s.
Right.
And it's still a room full of guys who are all confident and smoke and drink.
It's almost like a
and
less
are
sexy Mad Men.
It is, yeah. It's the male-dominated room full of men who think they're all badass, and it's such a great juxtaposition to Robert Graysmith, who is a little shy and a little awkward, but very intelligent, without all the false confidence that these guys have. It actually made me think Jake Gyllenhaal should have been Spider-Man. He's the perfect Peter Parker.
He's got this callow kind of like Boy Scout thing, which he plays in this. He was an Eagle Scout, Graysmith.
You know, he has a lot of scenes where he has several books or pieces of paper, that thing that's sort of nerdy. Like I have it in this book. Hold on, not this book, but this book. And he does a great job at it. I thought he was terrific. He's super believable.
And his coworker, who works the crime beat, is Paul Avery, played by Robert Downey Jr.
We love Robert Downey Jr.
Robert Downey Jr. was so fucking good in this. I may start wearing neckerchiefs. He just...
I don't blame you.
He gave that guy, and I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of the real Paul Avery, but he is not even a fourth as sexy and cool as Robert Downey.
I saw the pictures, yeah.
He's more kind of a straight, kind of a guy that you would figure would be chained to a typewriter his whole life.
And we talked about this with Wonder Boys. He continues to be this guy. Here's more bad news. Dean Martin wants to see in his office right away. He continues to be this, like his snark, his Stark snark, his Tony Stark snark is so perfect. You're doing it again. You're looming. The way he like accuses Robert Graysmith of looming at his desk. That's so Robert Downey Jr. And again, they've, just like in Wonder Boys, they've given him the I'm successful guy who is slipping, losing my grasp on my success.
We see the cracks in his armor. He smokes too much. He drinks too much. He's out partying when he should be working on his deadline. We see where it's headed. He doesn't. He's just living the life.
Hey, they got Robert Downey Jr. for that. He's probably going to fall apart. You know, like
he can call on some stuff.
Yeah, he's got some, act what you know. I'm not picking on the man at all, the actor at all. I absolutely adore him.
I heard a quote about Robert Downey Jr. in general, like what directors say about him. And it's that he punches through the movie screen. And it's a really good way of saying it because he's got what you can't teach. He's likable. That's Robert. Oh, that's my pal. And you're invested. You're instantly invested in him. And you're buying whatever he's selling.
Picture it like this. You're just a person working on the film. You read a bunch of Avery lines and you say, hey, who's going to play the newspaper dick? Oh, we got Robert Downey Jr. Oh, so not a dick. Like I now read all of his lines completely differently. He converts a dick role into a likable guy.
Absolutely right.
And it's super important in a lot of cases. In this movie is a great example.
So anyway, one of the unique things about this killer, the Zodiac killer, obviously, is that he writes letters to the general public, really, to the newspapers, to the police, in a way that hasn't happened really since Jack the Ripper. It's that same kind of thing. It's a unique thing that automatically drives him to the top of the serial killer heap as far as curiosity about him. But the Zodiac killer goes one step further and includes ciphers, coded messages that he claims will reveal who he is. Of course, it's not. He's just playing with them. A normal husband and wife who like to do puzzles solved one of the ciphers, all about how he loves to kill people. He wants slaves in the afterlife. Man is the most dangerous game of all, so I'm killing them. A whole lot of garbage that is only important to the killer himself. The newspaper publishes the letters as Zodiac hopes. In September, there is an attack at Lake Berryessa, and there are two victims of this attack. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard. For these murders, or for these attempted murders, he only kills Cecilia, though he tries to kill Brian as well. He wears a hood with the Zodiac symbol on it, a black hood. It's Robert Graysmith's cartoon of him, really, that has become iconic.
Yeah,
And
I actually recognized it. There's a close-up of him sketching it, and I'm like, "Oh, that." I remember seeing it on a punk rock record once.
that makes
Uh,
sense.
yeah, a
Yeah.
punk band used it on a 7-inch or something.
During the Reagan years, I'm sure.
It might have been Reagan Youth.
Yeah. So later, from that point on, we have Brian Hartnell, who is an audio witness to the Zodiac, really, an ear witness. He knows what he sounds like, but he can't say what he looked like, which is another missed opportunity. You know, there's always a problem when you do a violent film, when you do, say, Goodfellas, and you make the violence so sexy that, it's like, well, wait a minute, who are you calling the hero here? What am I saying? It's not sexy.
For a scene where you have to convince people that someone's being stabbed multiple times, it is very real looking. But the killer is not made to look slick. He's not made to look even competent. He's a
Mhm.
bit dawdling.
He has to
Yeah.
tie them up tightly to the point where he feels at all comfortable.
Kill the dangerous game as it is hogtied on a blanket. Weak sauce, just in case he sees this.
Yeah. I love your scenario where there's this 98-year-old guy just sitting, fuck those guys, I'm going to write them a letter. So there is another murder that happens of a cab driver, Paul Stein, on the corner of Washington and Cherry in San Francisco. And that's when we first meet the officers, Dave Toschi and Bill Armstrong. Dave Toschi is played by Mark Ruffalo. Anthony Edwards plays Bill Armstrong. The real life Dave Toschi wore his holster upside down so he could just pull it out from the bottom. And Steve McQueen patterned Bullet, his character, on that. They even make allusions to the holster being that. Downey's character tells Gyllenhaal's character.
He even calls him Bullet. He goes, "Hey, Bullet," at one point.
I think they told us that within the movie, in case anyone didn't know. I think they want the audience to realize when we first meet Toschi, he is sexy, he is cool, and he is on top of his shit. Steve McQueen, the coolest movie star on the planet at that point, is basing characters on him.
Yeah.
Even to him listening to jazz, as Steve McQueen does in Bullet, Toschi, when he's at home going over his crime notes, he's got jazz playing. So they want to show us how cool Toschi is at the beginning, and then obviously over the film, how the Zodiac case grinds him down, as it does to Bill Armstrong, who eventually wants out and transfers.
He's got a bit of a Starsky feel.
Oh yeah, that hair, you gotta.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
rocking the glazer.
There's a Starsky element. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some nod in Starsky to Toschi.
Well, I tell you, at one point when I saw the trench coat and the curly hair, and he had he was smoking, I was like, it's a missed opportunity if they don't do a Columbo with Ruffalo.
Oh yeah.
If you're gonna reboot it with anybody, or if you're gonna whatever, that should be his retirement plan. Do a series on Hulu or something. Ruffalo as Columbo,
and follow it with my Barney Miller.
Yeah, with Pascal.
Yeah, we'll set up a whole.
We'll do our whole reboot.
We'll do a whole set of cop shows.
Yeah. The sad thing about the Paul Stein murder, the Zodiac takes some of the bloody shirt from the cab driver and begins a process of mailing small swatches of it with his letters, so that they're absolutely from him. And some kids witnessed the murder from a nearby window and gave out the description. And this is yet another missed opportunity, Dave. The call goes out, and during those times, just the bald-faced racism, the call went out that you're looking for a black male suspect.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actual fact. Some officers drove by, and an officer saw a lumbering, crew-cutted, white, bespectacled, I believe, suspect, and did not question him. And that's dramatized in the film.
I think that's where you get that drawing from.
Yeah, in my Blu-ray special edition, it's 2 discs. This is the Zodiac speaking, a very long feature. We get to hear from the actual cop that night. And he was not with his regular partner. He was with someone else, and he described the suspect. He didn't file the report right after. And it's just a reminder. The reason that all these cases now are being solved by DNA is just because cops were not very good at their jobs for so long. cold case files are such a thing now because they simply couldn't figure it out. Every single time they're like, we solved a case. It's because they either got a tip, they got a confession, or DNA solved it for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't
Yeah,
mean to
I don't
just
want to
like
get
shit talk all the cops,
I was
but
about to say, I don't want to get too far into cops don't do much, but cops don't do much. They're
yeah,
like the secretaries who write down the facts of a crime, and then other people solve it or it doesn't get solved. And
yeah,
certainly, there's never a case where a killer leaps out and a cop stops him. Cops
yeah.
are very after the fact. So much media portrays them as crime stoppers and crime solvers. It was nice to see a movie where they didn't stop a single crime and they didn't solve the crime.
Just, I'll say this as a blanket disclaimer. Cops are overworked. They're spread thin. The reason that if they don't solve a murder in the first 48 hours, it goes unsolved is because 3 other people were killed in that 48
Mm,
hours. And
Thank
then
you.
that's
Yeah.
on their desk. So, there were a million reasons things went unsolved.
The movie does a great job of pointing out how hard it is. Police, their hands are tied as far as searching for handwriting samples or getting confessions or, how difficult it is to stay within the law while you're doing that. It also points out the logistics of 3 police departments sharing information. There's a bunch of very specific scenes that is kind of solved now thanks to the internet and computers and shared databases. But back then, a cop says to a guy, "The shoes, the wing walkers, we got the print from the wing walk," and I forget who was it. Tosky is like, "The what? The shoe prints?"
Armstrong, yep.
Yeah, Armstrong comes out of the blue for him because he had not heard about these.
I was going to say that earlier when talking about the Zodiac. One of the, not to give him too much credit, but one of the brilliant things he did is made sure that the murders were all in different jurisdictions, knowing that these police departments not only don't talk to each other, but are very competitive. No,
Right.
no,
Yeah.
that's our evidence. We got to look
Mhm.
for our guy.
I
And
should have been in on that handwriting thing, man. I should have been
yeah,
in on that. Like,
we'll send ours, you send yours. Like,
and they talk about how they're going to send it. I'll
yeah,
telefax it to you. We don't have telefax.
right.
I'll mail it to you. I'll mail it to you?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's one step up from the Pony Express. One final word on the cops. This film does a great job of showing the entire spectrum of police work on the Zodiac case and why it went unsolved. You have these dumbass guys in a radio car in the Presidio area minutes after they pass a guy who might have been covered in blood because it was dark, but if you question him, you might find out. And they just didn't even question him, kept driving because he wasn't the right color
Yeah.
they were looking for.
Good day, sir.
Yeah, they just let him
Yeah.
go. And you show the other end of the spectrum, Armstrong and Tosky, who are the best chance of solving this and are inundated with a mountain of false evidence and false confessions and false eyewitness supposed testimony.
None of it their fault.
None of it their fault.
I have a feeling that if the Chronicle had brought the letters to the police department
In the
and
beginning.
those letters had been given directly to those 2 police officers, that they would have had a much better chance of solving the case because it would have been a police investigation instead of a public, like, catch the serial killer contest.
Mhm.
It could not have gone worse on them as police officers.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about, how everyone cast in this is genius, right down to the small parts. It's an unintentional double feature here, Dave, because remember the police commissioner in LA Confidential? He is the chief of
Oh,
police in Riverside here.
I didn't put that together.
Yeah. There's one more actor I want to really call out for his performance, and that's John Carroll Lynch, our old pal Norm, son of a Gunderson from Fargo,
Yeah.
as Arthur Lee Allen. To this day, the chief suspect, even though he's passed away, whether he did it or not, there is a mountain of circumstantial evidence that points to him. There are a few
Mhm.
lead suspects. There is Arthur Lee Allen. There is a guy named Lawrence Kane. There's a guy named Rick Marshall. And there's a guy named Richard Gaikowski. These are all the suspects that all of these Zodiac geeks like myself
Hello,
know
everyone out
about.
there. Hollis just said all those names while looking up in the air to remember them. He did not look down at a screen. He looked
Ah,
up into his memory. Yeah.
Yeah, sadly. Regardless of who your pet suspect is, Arthur Lee Allen is the main suspect in the Zodiac book and Zodiac Unmasked. And so he is the lead suspect of this movie. How great was John Carroll Lynch in this film?
I can honestly say that John Carroll Lynch did the most acting in this film. He's not on camera as much as the detectives or Gray Smith, but his scenes are entirely acting with his face and body, and he is incredibly good.
Yeah,
And he's super important. So much hinges on his performance
right.
because Fincher has to be telling him, like, you're not necessarily the guy. You could be the guy. You might not be the guy. I want you to walk right down the middle of that.
And he does that.
He does it in spades. It's really something.
He does a good job of being provocative enough and suspicious enough to make these guys who are interviewing him, because at one point, Dave Toschi and Bill Armstrong go with Sergeant Jack Mullinex, the Vallejo head of PD, played by Elias Koteas. They go to interview Arthur Lee Allen at his job. He works some factory job. He makes them suspicious enough of him that they're like, this is our guy. We got to arrest this guy.
Mm-hmm.
But he's vague enough to keep them on the backs of their heels and to be like, but we need more. We got to get handwriting. We got to get something. He's even wearing a watch from the Zodiac brand that has the...
It has a gun sight on it, and it has the word Zodiac.
And he's saying provocative things like the knives that were bloody that were in the back of my car, I used them to kill a chicken. But I think I forgot to tell the officer that.
You threw that in?
It gives us a little taste of things that we don't really have elsewhere in the film. Robert Downey Jr. gives us a little bit of comedy, but they work comedy into this as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right.
When he says about, those bloody knives with the chicken, I got them. Mullinex is like, what? Like
they're glancing at each other. Like, am I the only one who heard that? Like, did he just say what I think he said?
And when Arthur Lee Allen gets up to go, he's like, I look forward to the time when police are no longer referred to as pigs. And Armstrong is like, thanks.
Yeah.
It's really well done.
There's not a lot of fun in the Zodiac movie. It's weird where the fun turns up. There's fun in that scene. For me, the first fun is when we're first introduced to Toschi and Armstrong, and they're going through, like, using people around them as props. That's very fun scene. Those two guys could be the LA Confidential guys.
The nice guys.
Two guys that Hollis and Dave would love to watch solve crimes together.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And these two guys are that. And they're sweet to each other.
Yeah, they're family. And so they continue tracking Arthur Lee Allen, but they're forced to look at other suspects. And it's really Robert Graysmith, this cartoonist who became obsessed with the case, who gets more and more into the details and kind of gets lost in the weeds to the point where his family kind of is like, take the time you need to solve this. And the wife takes the kids. Before it gets to that point, there's this great dating scene with him and Chloe Sevigny. It's like a blind date. Paul Avery is off in Riverside meeting a guy for an anonymous tip about the killer. Chloe's character is like, isn't that dangerous? And he's like, oh, yeah, well, he has a gun. He realizes how stupid it is.
Well, it could be an ambush.
Yeah, the Zodiac.
It like crumbles on, it like falls on him. Like, I need to make a phone call.
And isn't that great? Doesn't that just highlight the way that, like, someone who is like buried in evidence and so a part of it and so like, oh, that could be a hot lead. Yeah, they have blinders on. And someone coming to it fresh, like her character, is just like, have you not thought of this? Like, it's perfect. So there's a great scene later on where Armstrong and Toschi finally get the search warrant to toss or inspect the trailer that Arthur Lee Allen has in Santa Rosa. You're inside this trailer. He's got squirrels in cages. He's got squirrels running around loose. And he's got squirrels in the freezer. The guy likes squirrel to eat. Yeah. And serial killers usually start with smaller animals before they move up to humans. So there's some of that. There's porn around. There's Vaseline and a nightstick, it looks like, which we don't have to get into. There are guns. There are windbreakers. There's all sorts of Zodiac stuff, which it winds up, the forensics don't match or whatever. So it's a fall through. But that scene, it's almost as gruesome in its way as the murders.
Yeah. And any cop show, that guy, because he pulls up as they're finishing searching the trailer,
Mhm.
he pulls up. Any cop show, they tell him to turn around, they handcuff him, they take him in.
Right.
And this cop show, they're like, we
We need more.
don't know.
Yeah.
We don't have enough.
It's so maddening now for people that follow the case and who follow all of the details. You get an inkling of how frustrating this must have been for Armstrong and Toschi, because we know so much more now. And the internet has allowed a sharing of evidence. You can be a 12-year-old in Akron, Ohio. Within a year on the internet of searching, you can know more about the case than all three jurisdictions in 1969 and 70.
Yeah. You can take a cipher and throw it up on a code site and have an answer the next day.
You can have AI help you solve it.
You can. One of the beauties, I mean, I'm sure Fincher found himself saying like, oh, this would be impossible now. The time periods, no way to share the information. There's no cell phones. There's no way to warn the person. When Graysmith has this realization that Avery might be in real danger, he's like, I have to
Hope he
call
comes
his
back.
wife and wait for an answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all you can do is just hope he comes back. It shows what people are up against when they do modern films. It's very hard to write an unsolvable situation when there's
Yeah.
when situations are very solvable now.
There's a time jump. There's like 4 years, I believe, with just a black screen, and there's quotes. There's snatches of radio. At the beginning of the film, they show you this pit with just a couple of beams of this building that's about to be erected. And then there's that wonderful collapse time sequence where the building slowly gets built, just to show you how long, without any breaks in the case, without any letters sometimes from the Zodiac, we get to see Toschi age. There's all these Zodiac-related, I'm sure, gray hairs in his head.
That building scene was kind of important because as an audience, you're about to go from this is what they know about the Zodiac killer and this is where they're at. And then if you're not paying attention or if you're not careful, you think that what's happening is the next thing and everything else is still in everyone's heads. The Zodiac killer has faded. You ask someone a question, they say, oh my God, I have no idea. That was so long ago. Yet someone's maid can deliver extremely important evidence and think it's no big deal because it's about that thing that happened a decade ago. And to show this building being erected, he's like, I need something big. I need to say time has passed in an unmistakable way.
Yeah.
And he just crushes it. Is that a famous building? It looks like the something tower or something.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you what it is, but it is something. How I would have shot that sequence. I would have had the building being erected, but I would have done all of the radio snatches and the quotes and Chairman Mao dies and Sly and the Family Stone and all that. I would have done that over the erection of it. I think staring at a black screen while you get all of that passage of time doesn't say it to me. They had a beautiful Marvin Gaye song playing while the tower was erected.
Yeah, that was nice too.
It was nice, but to me, I could have had the radio over that song even.
I think that would have been perfect.
Use it. Yeah, but so that's something I would have changed.
How dare you?
I'm sorry, Mr. Fincher. At one point, it comes to Robert Graysmith, before he writes his book himself, he wants to go and visit Paul Avery because he knows more about the case than anyone. He wants to try and see if Paul Avery wants to write a book about it, to maybe jar something loose. He visits Paul Avery, who lives on a houseboat and who has continued drinking, drugging, and smoking himself to death. He looks like a ghost of himself when he opens the door. But Robert Downey Jr., the actor, his expression on his face, he almost opens the door as if someone's come to kill him or something. He goes from that to recognizing that it's Graysmith to, oh my God, my friend, it's good to see my friend. No one visits me. Come on in, friend. He goes through all of those colors.
Yeah.
It's masterful.
Yeah, he nails it.
And then that whole scene is an acting class. Like, he offers him a straight up vodka. He sits, he crosses his legs. Like,
the environment it's all happening in is very, it actually made me nostalgic for times when I used to end up in places that made me nervous. going into an apartment that you shouldn't go into and being around people you shouldn't necessarily be around.
Right.
It reminded me, it was very well done.
The romance of
Uh,
danger.
yeah, I mean that I experienced a little bit of that romance
Mm.
for when life was a little more dicey.
Yeah, yeah, for
It
sure.
was fun. It was fun to have a dicey life.
So
But
you're overlooking the squalor.
yeah, but it's the squalor that gets the message across.
It
You're like,
does.
this is not a safe place.
And you get the
Not a
feeling he's been up for days and days. He's in his boxers and a robe. He looks like death warmed over.
And let's not forget, the building was built.
Hmm.
He's had time to get over it. He's had time to go to rehab. He's had time to let it go.
Hmm.
And he hasn't. He really hasn't.
The upshot of this visit is he kind of tells Robert off and is like, what did you ever do about it? Like, you want me to do
Mm.
stuff? You want the cops to do stuff? Why don't you do stuff? He kind of kicks him out. And that sets Graysmith on his way as far as him writing a book about all this. And it's funny because his close personal friend, maybe his greatest friend ever from the Chronicle, does not take him seriously, totally disrespects him, and says, why don't you go back to the library, Boy Scout? Get out of here.
Mm.
So Graysmith starts slowly writing a book, compiling all these things. He talks to Dave Toschi. He gets Toschi to have lunch with him. He buys him lunch. Within 2 minutes of sitting down and having lunch with Robert, Toschi takes him seriously because he
Yeah.
shows all of this evidence he compiled from the Presidio Library, from another Navy library, that all these cipher books were taken out. They were stolen. And he says to him this great line, who are you again?
Yeah.
Because you told me you were a cartoonist. It reminded me of our
It reminded me of I Ain't Got It.
Yeah,
That's mine. His is Who Are You Again? But
right.
mine is What's Your Name again? Yeah.
This tough, grizzled San Francisco police guy takes him seriously. And it's the beginning of him compiling more official evidence with the help of Toschi, who gets him into other jurisdictions.
With the classic conceit, don't talk to anyone about this, especially don't talk to Sergeant Norwood.
Yeah, Narlo.
Narlo, yeah.
So he starts doing this. He starts working with Mullinex, with Narlo, with all of these different guys. And he starts working with his sons. His sons, who are like 8 and 9, are helping him with evidence. And one of the sons uncovers a cipher that was still not solved. And so he makes the news by solving the cipher. One of my favorite scenes in the entire movie, Dave, I'm sure you feel the same way. The last time we see Paul Avery, it's in a bar. He has an oxygen tank on the bar with a mask over him. He's drinking and he's smoking, and he's watching a TV on the bar. Deacon Blues by Steely Dan is playing in the bar. You know, he's watching the news, and Graysmith, they ask him, like, how did you solve the cipher? And he's like, well, a lot of the books I got from the library. And Avery goes, the fucking library. It's so good.
Yeah, it's really good. I literally stopped and I pictured Robert Downey Jr. They were setting up that scene, and they were like, okay, everyone places. And Robert Downey Jr. looked over at Fincher and said, like, I love this job. Because that scene, man, oh, it's so good. Yeah.
It's so good.
Yeah.
And he gets to say goodbye. It tells you everything. It tells you Paul Avery later died. We get that.
Yeah.
We also get that, like, you know, the student has become the master. This guy who used to loom on his desk is now on television for breaking through in a way that Paul Avery always wanted to. He wanted to be put in charge of the investigation at one point with his delusion.
He wrote a letter saying he should run it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a masterful scene in how many things it tells us.
We tend to avoid being coarse when it's not necessary, but I wouldn't mind the line being the fucking library for our episode.
Oh my God. The quote?
Yeah. The quote. Yeah.
Another scene that is really great. We meet the movie geek, Mr. Vaughn, and he's the guy who takes Graysmith into his basement. He was the organist at the Avenue Theater, and Rick Marshall worked there with him. He takes special delight in scaring Robert Graysmith.
The actor is Charles Fleischer. I looked him up.
Who was Carvelli on Welcome Back, Kotter. He was the bully.
I thought he looked familiar.
Yeah, he was a comedian, an LA comedian back in the day, but
He has a very expressive face. He has a
oh,
very, like, New
great.
York. Yeah, yeah, he's
Yeah,
very
I
real
love that.
dude.
He has a basement, and the Zodiac Killer mentioned his basement in one of the letters. So Robert Graysmith, he was there to ask about Rick Marshall. He had this poster that Rick Marshall supposedly did the handwriting on. The closest match that Sherwood Morrill, played by Philip Baker Hall, the handwriting expert, has ever seen to the Zodiac Killer's handwriting. Then Mr. Vaughn drops the bomb. Mr. Graysmith, I wrote those posters. That's my handwriting. It chills Graysmith to the bone, yet he still goes in the basement with him,
Yeah.
which shows you how driven he is. He needs to know,
Yes. Yeah. I'd rather put myself at risk and find out.
which is an interesting
And it
thing for a father of three to do.
yeah, and the line is delivered, and I'm talking about as if it were reality now. If someone says that to you, that implies, "I'm going to kill you so I can tell you this."
Yeah, I
Like,
don't care if you
you're
know.
already dead, so I'm giving up useful information because I know you'll never leave this house. It feels like that. And again, yeah, he then follows him into the basement.
And Mr. Vaughn takes such delight in fucking with Graysmith that you as an audience never really feel that he's in danger because you kind of see that this guy isn't the guy.
Mhm.
You wonder how much of the rendering of this scene is in Graysmith's mind. Is he really hearing something upstairs? Is this guy
Yeah,
really trying to scare him?
sure,
By the
yeah.
way, this house is my favorite set in the entire movie. So old timey, and the built ins, and the old fridge, and the cabinets, and the basement.
It's also a great place to make you uncomfortable because there's so many corners and dark spots, and you don't know where someone's going to jump out from.
Oh, absolutely.
He does a terrific job of acting absolutely almost paralyzed with fear and
Yeah,
eventually snapping out of it and making a run for it, quote unquote,
right,
run for it.
right. All right, let's bring this movie home. Robert Graysmith learns about bits of information that fell through the cracks. The call to Melvin Belli's house. First of all, Melvin Belli was played by the fantastic actor Brian Cox, who is in Succession. Most people know him now, but I've loved him since
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Manhunter, the fantastic film where he played the first Hannibal Lecter on the screen. But anyway, there was a call to his house by the Zodiac who said, "Today's my birthday. I have to kill." And it turns out that that birthday happens to be Arthur Lee Allen's birthday. And so he goes to Tosky's house in the middle of the night because of this provocative information. Tosky ends up going to a diner with Graysmith, and they have a sort of final examination of the case together. Graysmith very logically lays out all the information he found, and it fits puzzle piece wise with a lot of the half information that Tosky has had. The first 10 times I watched this movie, maybe, I love that scene because it seemed like Tosky and Graysmith were reaching somewhere together. And then Tosky was like, wow, maybe we will solve this case. This time when I was watching it, what I took away from it is Graysmith gave Tosky the gift of closure.
Mm.
Tosky is no longer worried about solving this case. All he needed was to solve it in his mind. He needed to
To know he
know.
was right. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, he knows how hard it is to jump through all the hoops the justice system wanted him to jump through to solve it officially and arrest a guy. But he just needed to solve it in his mind. Like Graysmith said earlier, I just need to look in his eye and know it's the guy and know that
Mhm.
it's him. And
That's a good
Tosky gets
point.
that.
And, now that I think about it, there the 3 main, because there's 5 or 6 people trying to solve it, but the 3 main people trying to solve it, Tosky, his partner Armstrong, and Graysmith, they all get, and we're about to get to Graysmith's, what Graysmith gets.
Hmm.
But Armstrong gets his ending too, which is, I'm gonna let it go. Armstrong is capable of saying, "I'm out. I'm switching to a different part of the department. I'm going to try sushi and I'm going
Hmm.
to be with my wife and kids." To which Tosky replies, "Good for you." I don't know what
Yeah.
his exact words were, but his
Yeah.
sentiment is, "Good for you. I wish I could do
Hmm.
something like that." Like they're each getting their happy ending.
You're absolutely right. And Tosky is not built that way, but recognizes that that's the thing to do. And you make an interesting point about Armstrong because throughout the film, what do we see about Armstrong? He gets everywhere first.
Mhm.
He's the
He
smartest guy in the
remembers the
room.
cookies.
Yes.
Yeah,
He puts
he's
pieces
yep.
together. He
Mhm.
is the guy.
He's the
He's
perfect
good at
partner
his
for
job.
Toschi.
Perfect
Yeah,
partner. They complement each
yeah.
other well. But also, he's the smartest guy. He gets everywhere first. He sees where this is headed. And so he
And he
gets out
sees it.
before anyone.
He sees it early enough that he gets out before his damage even
Yep.
starts. And you're right, that diner scene, that's what it is. It's Toschi being given the missing
Freedom.
pieces so that he can put it to rest. So that leaves one more person that needs to have some closure.
Right.
Please tell us about him.
There's this fantastic scene that takes place in a hardware store. It's
Mhm.
many years after the final scene in the diner with Toschi and Graysmith. And it's just Graysmith innocuously walking into a hardware store. We're like, oh, what's he going to pick up? Some more paperboard to, to work on
Mhm.
his investigation? When we see who the counterman is, it's Arthur Lee Allen. He is behind the counter and he's like, hey, can I help you? And this is the most telling thing of all. He recognizes Robert Graysmith on sight. His demeanor changes. Graysmith just stares at him. An ordinary counter guy would be like, I said, can I help you? And that's not
Mhm.
what happens. Instead, he shoots daggers at Graysmith. If looks could kill, Graysmith would be dead right then. And it's great because I think the song Baker Street is playing on the radio
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah. I
inside.
think you
It's
might
like
be
this
right. Yeah, yeah.
wonderful, the blaring horn from it.
Again, perfect ambient noise for a
Yes.
19 whatever hardware store. It's
70s, pitch
absolutely
perfect.
stunning. It is
Yes.
people, I lived it. I've been in those hardware stores. They don't even exist anymore, and
No,
it's absolutely perfect.
it's perfect.
And I'll say this too. The actor playing Lee, John Carroll Lynch, he manages to simultaneously stare the daggers you're talking about and also look incredibly nervous that there could be cars, like cop cars outside.
Yeah.
And this is what I was talking about earlier when I said he does the most acting in this movie. That's a lot of weight on his shoulders in that scene.
As we saw in Fargo, this is an actor who does not need a lot of lines to make an
Y- y-
impact.
Without him in that scene, I would have been like, that's it? That's it? But
Yeah.
that scene made the unsolvedness of this movie okay.
Yeah. Graysmith got what he needed. It's a great callback to when he's pressed by his girlfriend and eventually his wife, Melanie, played by Chloe Sevigny. And she's like, what do you need? What do you want for this to be over? And he's like, I just need to look at him and know that it's him.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
good callback. We get that in a hardware scene. Then he just walks out. We jump ahead. We see an airport in, I believe, Canada. We see Graysmith's Zodiac book with the original cover
Mhm.
on the stands. Number one bestseller.
Classic airport stand where there's lots of
Classic.
copies of the same book. Yeah.
Yep. And we see Mike Mougeot, the original victim of the shooting with Darlene Ferrin.
Liam McPoyle from Always
Uh,
Sunny.
oh, yeah, I've never seen that show.
Whatever you think of that show, he
Right.
is phenomenal in that show. He plays
Oh,
a
okay,
very weird
good.
dude in that show.
I'm not surprised. He's a weird looking dude. But anyway, long story short, great actor. He's there, Detective Bauert, who took over for Jack Mullinex. He is interviewing Mageau with a little picture lineup to try and find if one of these suspects in front of him is the guy that shot him in the opening July 4th attack with Darlene Ferrin. And he looks at the pictures, and in very little time, he puts his finger right on the face of John Carroll Lynch as Arthur Lee Allen. And he says, that is the man who shot me in July 4th, 1969 in Vallejo. So this is the crux of both Zodiac and Zodiac Unmasked. Arthur Lee Allen's the guy. And after that photo ID, which I think happens in like 92 or something, all of the police were motivating themselves to have a meeting to discuss charging Arthur Lee Allen. Arthur Lee Allen had a heart attack before that could happen. That is all in the text that comes up afterwards.
Read the ending.
Yeah, it's one of those films.
Yeah.
The wonder of this film, it takes someone who could be the killer and somehow resolves the story in a way that you have closure on a case that to this day the FBI doesn't even have closure on.
Mhm.
And it's still open in many counties. They're able to do that because that's how Graysmith's book is. Arthur Lee Allen is the sine qua non of that book. But, I rattled off the suspects at the beginning of this episode. The guy who runs the Zodiac killer site, Tom Voight, he believes Richard Gaikowski is the lead suspect or whatever. There are people who don't buy Arthur Lee Allen, yet I'm sure they would love this film.
Right.
It raises an interesting question, especially today with things like alternate facts. Everything in this movie is solely from police interviews and from files and things like that. But I'm sure they had to take license a few times to blend the narrative with the facts. What do you think is the responsibility of a filmmaker and a writer when you're dealing with real facts and real suspects, and most importantly, real victims? Is there a danger when you do a film like this of being like, well, case closed?
Yeah. Hey, did you hear? Fincher solved the Zodiac case.
Yeah.
You know, I think that he personally and morally has obligations to the victims and, you know, has to be very careful about how he lays it out. But I don't think that there is any ultimate right or wrong. I think if he feels that the piece of art he's trying to make calls for this particular narrative, then I think that it's his right to present it that way. I could see, you know, maybe somebody has a spouse or something who's like obsessed with this. I could see someone saying like, that's it. We're going to see Fincher's movie and then we're going to be done with it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is a gift, freeing you from all the mental real estate. I think this is the way certain people are too. I know I'm this way. I'm like, all right, let me push all of the Bigfoot stuff out of my head and I'll work on the JFK assassination for a while. All right, let me push that out of my head. Now I'm on to the Zodiac. Like,
get rid of all that and you're understanding quantum physics.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, yeah.
There's somewhere better to focus that, right?
There is. Yeah.
This movie could be a gift of closure for people besides Dave Toschi.
If I saw this movie when it came out, when the screen went black and the words came up, you would have heard me in the theater going, son of a bitch. Like, that's it. But now I felt very much that each untied thread got tied and I was satisfied. You know what? Another thing I wanted to mention is that I'm not surprised that people like the Zodiac Killer exist. I'm never like, oh my God, how can such evil exist? On a planet with billions of people who achieve sentience through what might as well be a bucket of clams in their head, like this gooey mess that uses electricity to put ideas together. The idea that several of those people end up being insane in some way or another is not surprising. He's no more surprising than a hoarder or some other problematic person. Brains are amazing. They do a great job 99% of the time. But there's bound to be some people, and it's bound to look like evil or something outside of reality. But it's just what you should expect when you make several billion people. Some of them are going to be serial killers. Anyway.
That makes total sense to the bucket of clams in my skull.
See, it's an impressive bucket of clams. I don't mean to denigrate our bucket of clams.
No, it works. All right. Well, I'm going to see if I can drum up some neckerchiefs.
Let's get a couple of neckerchiefs for the next episode.
Yeah.
I mean, it's time that we really leaned into this Robert Downey Jr.
I think so. I just love that fucking guy. All right, Dave. Thanks very much.
All right, Hollis.
Be careful out there.
I'm telling you.
Hollis and Dave would like to thank you for enjoying Pop Culture Graveyard.